So I have a very fun one for you. I got three gotchas just for you, and I'm going to be sharing you some of the most common mistakes that I see developers who are new to Conan that are learning making along the way. And these are some of the things that just make your day a little frustrating when you discover these weird, quirky things, but they're a fact of life, and you're probably going to find them eventually. So these are true for Conan 1.x as well as 2.0. So I'm going to focus on 2.0 and share how they exist in 2.0. But the truth is they exist in both versions, so you're not going to avoid any of these. So let's sink right into this. So first up, we got gotcha number one. If I don't make mistakes, it always works better. And in this one, all I did was Conan new, and this is requires boost. So nothing too fancy there. And this is just a default one. So if I do our regular Conan install, right? Finds all the packages, generates all my files, fantastic, right? And next I want to configure it. So I'm going to do cmake, and we're going to configure this, but I want to work in debug. Right? Sounds reasonable. Working locally, I installed my stuff. Oh, I made a mistake already. We're going to do build. We're going to run this again. CMake's going to configure, finds all our dependencies. You can see all the Conan boost components are found. Even some of the transitive dependencies are pulled in. Great, right? So we're going to do a lovely CMake build. And what the hell? Like, why? Like, this is so unhelpful, right? And the reason is, if we scroll up all past all of this, we're going to notice we had some very lovely settings. We installed everything in release, right? And if you look at the command that I ran to configure, build release generators, right? We didn't specify Conan in debug. We didn't change our Conan settings. So our ID integration doesn't work. And you can see this because if we do release, everything works again. And now if I build, if we're lucky, it should be successful, and voila. Right, so the error we saw the first time around was just a missing include. Right, this could be for you, libraries not being found, dependencies not being found by CMake on occasion, depending on how the CMake scripts in the recipe is written. So you want to make sure that when you're working in an IDE and you're changing things in the UI, that's the very first place you'll make this mistake. You'll be in VS Code and you'll be like, oh heck, I'm just going to go change from VS Code from release to debug. And you're going to be like, oh, why doesn't this work? And it's going to be because of something like this, because your Conan settings that you ran and installed don't work. So if you wanted this to work in debug, our Conan install command, we'd have to do -s build type equals debug. Conan file text doesn't exist because I'm in the wrong folder, of course. And this time it'll create the correct generators folder with a debug path for us. I'm not going to let this build because it's going to take too long, but you can imagine it working for yourself. So next up, we have gotcha number two. This one is a little bit funky. So let's take a look at our generate method. This is one of the new things that we've added in Conan 2.0, and it's something that most people should be familiar with by now. We're going to notice here that it's going to expose some folders. Oh, look, we got a generators folder. Oh, wow, that's great. Right, you're going to scroll down, you're going to scroll down, you're going to scroll down, you're going to see more folders. Oh, self-dependencies, great, I'd like to use that, tax dependencies. But you might notice this one sentence here. Not all the fields of the dependencies are exposed. Isn't that just fantastic? So gotcha number two is going to be not all the information is going to be available all the time. So some parts of the graph, some of the information in your dependencies, some of your folders, some of the attributes on that Conan file object that you're used to working with in Python may be complete or they may not be. So if we jump back to our terminal and we cat our Conan file, this is just, again, a simple Conan new CMake lib. And you can see here I added a self CPP info, and we're going to add some CXX flags to our project that we're going to expect our consumers to have. And it's going to be a WR. They probably shouldn't be doing this in actual code, but just for the sake of an example, I stuck this in here. Right, so now if we do Conan graph info, Conan graph info, we spit this out into our terminal, right? You can see our label, Conan file, we got our gotcha 2 1.0, and you can see here there's our ref, package ID, the generic empty description settings options, and we come down here to CPP info, and we look at root, we can scroll down, we can see our CXX flags here are null. This is because the package info is not evaluated unless the graph is actually being built. So the only cases where that's going to be is going to be Conan create and Conan install. So this is a fun instance of where your commands don't work. So if we ran this, but we did Conan create instead, Conan create, right, -f, we want our format JSON output. We'll let this do its thing. It's going to run, it's going to build. Now we're going to be able to notice right away at the top, CXX flags WR. Because the package has now been built and the package was pulled locally, this is why we're able to see the CXX flags. And you're probably wondering, darn it, Chris, why can't they just run the package info method anytime? Well, it's because a lot of times developers want to be lazy and they don't want to declare things multiple times. So you might be familiar with helpers inside of Conan like collect libs. These types of dynamic things where they actually read the package folder means the package needs to exist on disk before these functions can work. So this is just a fun instance where these two commands will show you different information because sometimes it's evaluated and sometimes it's not. And when you're looking for things, sometimes this will be the thing that gets you. My default advice is just do your testing with Conan create. Conan create is going to be the most complete information for most people, and it's just a good default place to start, and if it's missing from there, you can work your way deeper. Now, if we move on to number 3, this one is a little bit different. So if we list the files in our directory, we've got a cute little conefile.txt. And all I'm doing here is I'm requiring fmt. Now, I'm going to change this for a quick second. And let's say we weren't ready to do this yet, right? 10 sounds great, but it's too new. We don't want to start there. We're going to do 9.1.0, right? Seems like a reasonable one. This has been out for a while. We want to be safe when we do our development, right? So we want our Conan install. What we want to do is we want to make sure that every time we do a build and we check this into CI/CD, that our version is going to get used. We don't want whatever's been cached on the system to cross-pollute our branch, our build for the testing we're doing. Maybe somebody else on my team was using FMT 10.0, but I don't want to be impacted by this, right? This is something super common, and I chuck this into the reproducible builds bucket. If you want predictable results, you absolutely need to do this next step, which is -l conan.lock. I wish this was the default on for everybody, but it's not. So you should be using lock files. In Conan 1.x, there's a little asterisk there because there's a lot of workflows that break and don't work, but 2.0 fixes most of those like limitations. You can still use lock files in Conan 1.x. They do work. I have examples. You can look at my user management project. You can get workflows to get this result. It's just a little bit more work, a little bit more tedious. So now when we do our Conan install, we got to actually ask it to generate it first. So don't make that mistake like me. Lock file out equals conan.lock. We want to tell it to generate it. It's the first time we're doing this. We need to ask it to. Now, if I ran this again, without specifying a lock file, it should use the lock file. You'll see here at the very beginning, this time it printed using lock file, whereas last time it said generated lock file. So that's how you know it's working. Great. Now, let's say we did our testing and we want to make sure everything's good. We want to edit our Conan file.txt. And now let's say we're ready. We did our testing. We're confident. We're ready to move to 10.0.0. Save. And now we want to Conan install and we want to use our lock file, right? If we just run this again, it won't update. What you need to do is you need to add on a little bonus, which is lock file dash partial. And when you run partial, it's going to know that it can add things to the graph. So if you're working with a lock file that's different on Windows and Linux and Mac, perhaps there's a system dependency on Linux that's pulled in special, or there's a Windows specific library that exists in your graph and you need to add it. This is how you would do it, right? So if we clear this for a second and we cat our Conan file.lock that we asked it for, you'll notice here it still has our revisions, which is why previously it told us it didn't work. So if we run this command without the typo that I think I made, run our lock file, now it has our 10.0. So it's a really simple way to manage your lock files, to be consistent, to aim for that reproducible build. Now when you chuck this into CI/CD, you're probably going to sit there and wonder, which version is it going to pick? Is it going to pick 9 or 10? Well, it's going to pick the best one based on your version ranges. So if the rest of your graph defaults to 9 because of your version ranges, then it'll pick 9. But if not, it'll allow it to upgrade to 10. And with that, those are the 3 big gotchas. So going over it one more time, the first one is not all the information is available at all the time. So depending on what commands you're going to be running, you may or may not have access to some of the information in your graph. Self-dependencies is one that changes between 1.x and 2.0, and it's a good one to keep an eye out for if you're trying to access that. It might not be available in the build method or the package method, but it probably is in the generate or the validate. So things to look out for. Number 2 is going to be, did I just get those backwards? I am so sorry. I just gave you number 2. Number 1 was using your IDE and trying to switch between your configs that you're working in. You need to make sure to call Conan install for the Conan graph that you want it to be as well. So you can't just willy-nilly change the settings in your IDE. You need to make sure you run Conan install for those settings. If they don't match, you'll see weird things like missing includes, libraries, dependencies not being found by CMake. There's a handful of examples, and these are the types of things you should be looking out for. The third one we just went over is reproducible builds, locking down your dependencies. This is especially true if you're using a third-party server to provide your packages. You want to make sure that those upstream changes aren't going to be breaking news. One of the things that C++ developers often forget, it's not just what you're trying to build that's important, it's also how it's being built. And that recipe revision captures the how. So if someone changes something in the build graphs and adds flags, you want to make sure that those are captured, because the whole point you're using Conan is to manage those settings, manage those ABIs, to have that package ID that you can trust and rely on. And pinning your dependencies and making sure you have what exactly you expect is the first step in making sure that happens. Thank you very much for watching this. If you liked it, hit the like button. If you didn't, hit the dislike button. If you want, you can comment down below and you can share your thoughts, ask your questions. If you disagree and you have some hot takes you want to share, at me on Twitter, at Prince-Kursemski or _ on Twitter, and feel free to let me know what you think.